At the top of my mind, I should say, can you blame me though? IBM stock isn't seeing much buying after a historic 24% crash on Tuesday because of a shock earnings warning. That warning came out of nowhere. That's a horrible sign for good old Big Blue. ASML results rocked, a good sign on the AI spending front. And then we have gazillionaire Warren Buffett in a rare interview saying he initiated the purchase of Alphabet shares over at Berkshire Hathaway. The read there, Buffett still sees value in Alphabet despite it being up 15% this year and leading all the Mag 7 stocks. I think it's also a tell on the quarter Alphabet is about to reveal in a few short weeks. Then on the tech front, we have the latest BofA fund manager survey. It's always a treasure trove of insights, but for today, I was locked in on insights on all things tech ahead of earnings for the entire space coming up soon. First chart will probably upset the Mag 7 bulls. Sorry, not sorry. Fund managers don't expect hyperscalers to pull back on CapEx spending despite pressured stock prices. Next, the semiconductor bulls would be wise to digest fund managers calling out being long semis is one of the most crowded trades in the game. That's a fancy way of saying everybody loves these stocks. Perhaps too many people love them. On the positive side here, though, and tied to the AI theme, more fund managers are warming up to the U.S. being headed toward an economic boom. Who doesn't love a good boom? Here in my opening bid roundtable, Patrick Kennedy, All-Source Investment Management founder and managing partner, Duncan Toms, HSBC strategist, alongside Yahoo Finance' Brooke DePalma. Good to see you all. Brooke, let me come to you off the top here. I think this market is still trying to digest what we heard out of IBM yesterday. At the same time, we get positive results out of ASML. So the market doesn't really know where to go.
Right. The market is trying to assess all these different puts and takes about where exactly this memory trade is going and where exactly this hardware story sits in the mix of it, too. You do have IBM moving slightly higher at the open today. And largely what we're seeing there is investors sort of assess, OK, they said to us that basically right now everyone's focusing on those memory trade, focusing on the demand that is there. But at the same exact time, then, like you said, we heard from ASML that their pipeline, what they expect is through 2028. They did say specifically that they plan to increase that extreme ultraviolet technology, their machines capacity by 30% from the 2026 level of 65 systems to 85 systems in 2027. And I was even reading a note from Bank of America this morning that they're actually forecasting 88 shipments in 2027, 105 shipments in 2028. And so it seems like right now the focus is still on that end of the system. Of course, ASML playing a key part for manufacturing chips. And so it doesn't seem like that story is going away, especially following this strong report from ASML, which you can see on your screen is moving about 1.5% this morning.
Patrick, where should one in the tech space, if you're a tech investor, where do you take your cues from? Are you more concerned about IBM and lean more bearish? Or you look at ASML, check done, good quarter and outlook from them. And even what Warren Buffett said in an interview today, him initiating that position in Alphabet.
I wouldn't say bearish. I would say cautious. Right now, we think, the story stocks have they've come up a long way, and we're really trying to thread a needle at this point. The market has really baked in a lot of good news. And if you look at valuations just at the index level, there's not a lot of room for error. So with that being said, we don't think that there's any big nails in the story, so to speak, as of yet. But if one were to come, the price action on the downside is the risk, not missing out on the upside, in our opinion.
Duncan, I showed a chart at the top of the show on how crowded the semiconductor trade is. Does a chart like that, does every fund manager saying they are concerned about semis being overcrowded at this point into earnings, does that worry you?
I mean,
go ahead, Duncan.
Sorry, just not particularly. I would say more in terms of the overall AI trade right now. We need to remember that this is structural, right? And so we're going to get natural rotation happening among the hyperscalers, the semiconductors. And I think what's worth bearing in mind is that Magnificent Six, let's say, those hyperscaler related names that we traditionally called the Magnificent Seven, they have actually derated over the last kind of 6 to 8 months. So back in November, when everyone started talking about the AI bubble, a number of these stocks came under pressure. And the reality is we've moved from talking about bubbles to bottlenecks. So yes, we might get natural pauses in the cycle, but we still think that this AI trade is structural and that things can resume with an upward trend there.
Duncan, look through the prism of the Mag 7. Let's just stay there for a second. Has the AI bubble already burst? If you just look at the Mag 7 names outside of, actually, I'll take out Alphabet because that stock is up double digits. But the Mag 6, like you mentioned, Is that a sign that the bubble has burst and it could be a good opportunity to get into some of these names?
I wouldn't say the bubble has burst, but definitely a good opportunity to potentially get into some of these names again. And the earnings are really what's making that so strong. Not only earnings expectations, but the way that earnings have moved over the last year or so. So that really makes us quite confident that away from the narratives about bubbles, away from the narratives about all the different pushbacks we're seeing with regards to the AI trade over the last 6 weeks or so, the hard, cold evidence in the earnings is still strong. We mentioned ASML today. We had TSMC earlier this week, Micron a few weeks ago. So, of course, this is going to be a big focus in the coming couple of weeks when we get those hyperscalers reporting and more of the semiconductors. But that's more what we're placing emphasis on at this point in time.
Brooke, it's not lost to me. You're down at the NASDAQ like you are normally, and this has been a good year for IPOs. We've heard really from every single bank, got a taste of it this morning at Morgan Stanley results, that the IPO pipeline remains strong. The outlook for M&A remains strong. And really the next shoe to drop here, Brooke, could be finally either that OpenAI Anthropic IPO, whatever exchange, either one may take place this year, if at all.
I think it'll be really interesting to see how exactly the timing of this all plays out. I mean, right now, Anthropic certainly ramping up for what looks like an IPO later on this year, OpenAI pushing it out to 2027. And what's been so interesting is just how optimistic right now, as you mentioned, that global fund manager survey from B of A, many still think that there is still more room to run, despite the fact that SpaceX took a lot of air out of the room down here at the NASDAQ. I mean, what an extraordinary pop on the day of now pulling back from that IPO debut, but certainly so many still expecting that this global economy will be a boom and that there still is more room to run right now.
Patrick, you think the economy is in the start of a boom, or perhaps longer or further along than one would expect?
I think we're in the middle to late innings, right? I don't think we're at the start by any means. I mean, look at the gains in the S&P over the last 3 years, right? So those same magnificent 6 or 7, look at the performance in 2020, and then look what happened in 2022 as soon as the macro changed, right? So those valuations can turn pretty quickly, in our opinion. Again, we're not calling for a big bust or anything like that, but we are saying that there's been a lot of run up in those names. And now, rather than just spending with cash flow, they're actually borrowing money to go out and go after some of these AI initiatives. So again, if it doesn't work out to a T, there could be problems. We're not saying that's going to happen, but we're very cautious right now, especially with 7 names making up 40% concentration within the S&P.
How concerned are you, Patrick, that we will get a Fed rate hike? How does that impact the thesis for a lot of these stocks folks are long or aggressively long, like I just mentioned, like we were just talking about in semiconductors?
I think we will get a rate hike over the next 12 months. We were talking about inflation 6 months ago. I think it's pretty simple to see when oil goes from 60 up to near 100, that inflation is going to be impacted, right? And as long as Iran is going on and the Strait of Hormuz is shut down, we're going to see impacts to inflation. So, our concern is inflation ramps up, the Fed does have to pivot and has to hike a bit more. Now, does that impact stocks like Amazon, Google, Apple right off the bat? Probably not, right? But any stocks that are trading based on sales, pre-earnings, the story stocks, that is absolutely going to impact those names, in our opinion.
Duncan, when you talk to clients, when you talk to your team, how concerned are folks around potential rate hikes? Not just one, but the possibility of getting 2 this year.
Yeah, a little concerned, but I would say it's tough to out-hawk what we already have in the price. Mm-hmm. So I would more be looking at the idea that some of these hikes come out of the price. We're not looking for any Fed rate hikes this year at HSBC. And ultimately, if these hikes are going to come out the price, that can be a tailwind for risk assets. Now, yesterday's inflation data, very, very welcome news for that. I think away from the way that the energy price is clearly moving and linked to what's going on in the Middle East, take a look at goods inflation. If you take the last 4 months, we're in outright deflation for goods inflation. Or supercore inflation yesterday. For month-to-month supercore inflation, we're looking at deflation as well. So I think there are certain pockets that we can look at, which if some of these trends persist, by the time we get to September, we could be looking at a very different picture with regards to the Fed, and these hikes could come out the price over summer.
Duncan, I follow the HSBC team's work very closely, and y'all are very good at coming up with investing themes. You know, if one is concerned about a series of rate hikes over the next 12 to 18 months, what are some themes that could withstand that potential storm?
Ultimately, AI. That is the way that we've got to look at things for the second half of the year, because what's happened over the last 4 or 5 months or so is we've had both US exceptionalism coming right back to the fore at the same time that the AI trade has done very well, particularly with regards to the semis that we've already spoken about. Now, later on in the year, if we were to get perhaps expectations catching up with reality, US exceptionalism has become much more consensus over the last month or so, then we might see a little bit of disappointment out of the US on that macro story. But then we have to separate US exceptionalism from potentially AI exceptionalism. Because given the high weighting to AI and tech in the S&P 500, we could have a scenario where maybe the US economy disappoints ever so slightly, but actually that market cap weighted S&P still does pretty well.
Patrick, on the S&P 493, what sectors do you like and why?
So we're bullish on cybersecurity, biotech right now in a big way. You know, we think cybersecurity, when we're talking about AI, is a clear winner, right? So the stronger AI gets, cybersecurity needs to keep up with that. When you look at Anthropic, we were just talking about the IPO, when they release a new model, it's kind of a pause button across the tech industry, right? So when they released Mythos, they had to immediately pull it back. And the reason why was they found 270 bugs within Mozilla Firefox, right? The last release for Mozilla, they found 22 bugs in-house. So going from finding 22 bugs to 271 bugs because of AI, that shows you the enormous amount of holes they need to plug because of AI, right? So while it's very good for cybersecurity firms to use AI to find those vulnerabilities, the hackers also have that same technology and can go after those new vulnerabilities. So we're very bullish on cybersecurity right now. We think it's a secular trend here to stay. We would buy a basket and stay long. And then the other sector we like a lot right now is biotech, right? So you have a lot of biotech index beaten down still over the last 10 years. AI is another great theme built into biotech. You're seeing a lot of breakthroughs because of it. And on top of that, you're seeing M&A now pick up in the sector in a big way.
Yeah, so a big announcement, I think it was yesterday, the Chai Discovery team. They're doing a lot of interesting things on AI and biotech, big capital raise. Brooke, last word to you. Any read-through on this PPI index? Of course, it looked a little tame to me compared to what we got to the CPI yesterday, but all in all, maybe no big red flags from this?
I think what really stood out the most is that we continue to see groceries to continue to be sticky. At the same exact time, I think the big question now is whether or not we already saw peak inflation, especially as that CPI report came out on a week where we are seeing strikes again happen between the U.S. and Iran and the re-escalation of this conflict. And right now, I think many Fed governors, even Williams specifically, sort of saying that, you know, could we expect overall inflation to move down to about 3.25% by the year end, especially as those oil prices hopefully decline once again. And I think that's really the big question moving into the back half of the year, especially now when 50% of investors are still expecting a rate hike in September.
All right, good stuff. We got a lot more coming up here on the show. Coming up, in fact, Paramount in the hot seat as my stock of the day, and PayPal maybe on the cusp of selling out to a much younger rival. I'll be back with all that.